the 10th of February, Safer Internet Day. And it comes as South Africans, especially children, spend more and more time online than ever before. But globally, governments are moving beyond the guidelines. They're moving towards hard legal restrictions on children's social media access. Australia, of course, leading the world since December last year. A blanket ban for under 16s. Spain then followed in February 2026, earlier this month, becoming the first European country to implement an under 16 ban. Malaysia also implementing similar rules, but there are other countries as well. France, Norway, Denmark, Greece moving to ban those under 15 years old. The UK actively is consulting an Australian style model. Even China has taken a different route. They've including what's known as minor mode. That's limiting screen time and content rather than banning access outright. But what about South Africa? And there are growing concerns here. Cyberbullying, online scams, harmful content, the algorithm misinformation, the lack of digital literacy, also the weak enforcement mechanisms to particularly keep vulnerable people safe. So joining me now, Minister of Communications, Digital Technology, Malatsi. Minister, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. Australia's done it, Spain's done it, Malaysia is doing it. Do you think South Africa is heading towards similar restrictions? What's the conversation in your department?
Morning, Lester, and morning to the listeners of CapeTalk. Look, it's something that we are thinking about the best approach, because there is no doubt that we live in an age of increased online harms, children becoming increasingly more vulnerable to abuse, to cyberbullying, and even to age-inappropriate content, and to the extent that we're also seeing a rise in luring and grooming of children online. So we have obviously thought about what the countries you have mentioned are doing, and the conversation is about, putting the guidelines in place and also enforcement. I think there's always a temptation whenever there is a problem in society to say, okay, let's put bans, let's put restrictions in place. But prior to doing that, we have to capacitate ourselves with enough mechanisms, both in government and even from a law enforcement perspective, to be able to enforce those. Otherwise, we end up having cosmetic interventions that seem like we are doing something and not. So I think the most important thing as from a South African perspective is, one, we are watching the debate globally. Of course, we want the internet to be a safe space for our children, and that's why there are several initiatives that the Films and Publication Board is doing from an educational perspective and awareness perspective in terms of even restrictions on content. And making sure that not only children but parents are aware of limited content restrictions. But I think one of the things that we are putting a lot of thought into is what we can put in place for the social platforms, for even platforms to start thinking about age verification interventions in place. Because I was reading one report from Australia actually. This kid was saying he got banned on Instagram because of the age restriction, but all he did was to use his friend's license and verification in order to circumvent that restriction. So already even in that there are weaknesses. I don't think we'll ever get globally to a perfect solution, but there has to be enough guardrails in place so that we limit the abuse.
But what about the platform accountability? And I perfectly understand that many platforms operate outside of a South African jurisdiction, so it's very difficult in an interconnected world of multiple jurisdictions. How do you hold a Meta, who is, I understand, registered in Ireland, accountable in South Africa? They're probably accountable to EU regulation because they're registered in an EU country, Ireland. But how then do we say, while we have a particular social fabric and dynamic in South Africa, you're doing South Africans and South African young people harm? How do we even hold a mega multinational account?
Look, we do have space, and one of those space is through initiating regulations that are applicable at a local level that give life, for instance, to the Child Offences Act, that also give effect to the Films and Publications Board Act, which overlooks the appropriateness of online content and what gets distributed in there. And I think a weakness in the current dispensation have been the approach that, because of the origin of these platforms and where they come from, therefore there is limited scope in there. But the challenge can be set because we've got, as you correctly said, national priorities based on what is happening here in South Africa. I think one of the things that scared me the most was that, particularly in child inappropriate content or child abuse cases, the FPB in the 2024-2025 financial year, provided content analysis in over 25 cases where inappropriate content was being shared with children, and a large part of that was pornographic content by, I dare say pedophiles, trying to groom kids, and those cases are continuing in court. This year, they are providing that support to law enforcement in over 12 cases, and there have already been some serious, convictions that have happened in there. But the key thing is that is reactive to when the crime has already occurred. Awareness is always going to be helpful in limiting access to inappropriate content. But I think from a government perspective, what we are thinking about and what I'm thinking about is the right balance between, creating something that you'll be able to enforce, and that there will be action for violation of that. For the platforms, for instance, there are already penalties that the FPB can impose on inappropriate content, and we need to strengthen those, not necessarily make them stringent to the extent that it infringes on the freedoms of people. But I think the key ingredient for us is the internet has, for it to be a productive space for use for even children, it's gotta be safe, and we have to limit the infiltration of all these nefarious forces.
Unhealthy internet consumption isn't just about access to unappetizing material. It has impacts on a macro and a micro economy. I think on the proliferation of online betting adverts, it has impacts socially, and we talk about cyberbullying and mental health, but then also is politically in what we consume, how we consume it, and whether it is credible enough. I largely believe we need to bring back two subjects, but not just at school level, somehow into adulting as well. Civics and media literacy, simply knowing and being able to ascertain whether an image is credible or not. And I know that AI is can be very confusing these days. But how do we tell someone who is middle-aged to an older person? How do we educate and say, well, there is this thing called the internet. You can't always trust everything that's there. This is how you tell the difference between a bona fide news website and something that is just there for clicks. Where do we even start?
Look, I think the foundation of it is, one, digital skills and basic digital skills. The growth of AI generated material in the last few years has actually diluted even the conversation, and even people with fairly educated, we often fall prey to to such content, and that's why globally there's a move around watermarking of that content in particular. But I think you raise a key question in terms of civic and media skills. I think one of the things that we are doing with NEMISA, which is one of our entities focused around training young people on digital skills and basic digital skills, is to empower people to be in a position to distinguish between what's real and what's authentic, right? And also having the distinct sense of useful use of the internet, because we know, one of the stats that always fascinates me from research that was done, I think by the Digital Council, was that when they analyzed the use of the internet in South Africa, over 50% of that was geared towards social media. the initial response to that, you think, okay, cool, this is very interesting, but it's geared towards entertainment. That's not to discount the fact that within that realm of social media, there's content creators who are running their own businesses and some doing fairly well on that. But you'd want to see more of it dedicated towards online education, more of it geared towards, digital entrepreneurship, because that's how you're increasingly going to get more people involved in the digital economy and ultimately to grow our economy.
I'm going to get in trouble, but I often say just because you're a content creator doesn't mean you're creative. But I'm going to stop calling you minister now. I'll pay respect, deference to the office, and you'll take off that, and I want to talk to you as Solly now. Solly, sure. DA member. Bombshell last week. John Steenhuisen deciding he's quitting the race. It's now wide open nominations and the end 27th of February. Firstly, give a synopsis on your thoughts on the 2 terms so far as John Steenhuisen as DA leader, and whether or not you're disappointed, or you may not be disappointed that he's decided not to run for a 3rd term as DA leader.
Look, I think when you review John's tenure as DA leader, we often forget, and some of us were very close to the scene because I was the national spokesperson in 2019 when the DA, we suffered our first electoral loss since we've ever existed, right? It's the first election that we regressed. And the organization was in a state of uncertainty. The leader of the party left, followed by the chairperson of the party, both, on the same day in one meeting. And John rose up to the occasion to be the interim leader. And when he was elected to be the leader at the Congress that he had, there was no doubt that he was the choice that the party needed at the time. And then you look in terms of what happened between 2024, the 2024 election and now, the DA recovered from the electoral loss. We then got 22%. And then for the first time, we're able to form part of national government, which I think will rank amongst his greatest achievement as a leader in steering the DA to that. So I think he has done well for his tenure. I think he acknowledges that he has taken the DA as far as he could have taken.
Is there as far as John Steenhuisen could take him? And yes, you could argue that brought the DA to a greater electoral share, part of a GNU, but in real numbers lost the DA 130,000 votes. To me, it indicates it's a DA that is in fact not growing, it's receding. Where and who does the DA call on to lead not only in LGE 2026 but to an election in 2029?
Yeah, the best thing about it is our nominations open on the 28th of Feb, and there's a lot of speculation about who's gonna stand.
Are you contesting?
For the federal positions.
For the federal positions, yes.
Yeah, I'm currently the deputy chairperson of the party, so I'll be seeking re-election for that.
And any endorsements so far?
Nominations haven't been open.
Well, I'm trying to get something out of you, Sonny. That's why I'm asking you now. This is a whole ruse to get you here to ask about DA politics.
No, I will. You know what? And fair question. Fair question. But also there are guidelines in terms of our campaigning process. So on the 29th, we can have the conversation about endorsements.
Okay, I'll call you again on the 29th. Solly Malatsi, Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much
for joining us.
Awesome.